welcome to this month's meeting of the Workforce Talent Development Board Forestry Workforce Steering Committee. And I'm going to open this first with, hopefully you can all see the agenda. And I don't think we have a quorum yet, but Aaliyah's going to keep us posted as that comes about. So again, welcome, and I think we'll just go right into our agreements and year in review with Todd.
Hey, thanks, Craig. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you being in attendance today. We just wanted to give you a friendly reminder, given that we're starting the new year, and oh, by the way, Happy New Year, around the Workforce and Talent Development Board's member agreements, sort of our charge to the way we do business. It's a bit catchy and a little bit corny, I'll have to admit it, but the executive committee came up with sort of values and bullets under each of those values that correspond to the acronym WTDB. So first is, as a reminder, work collaboratively, share with wisdom, engage, and participate. The T is transparency and trust. Could you scroll down a little bit, Aaliyah? Great, thank you. And then data-driven decision-making on many fronts. We call that out and are doing many things in different spaces to try and create more of that, particularly within the state bureaucracy. And then last, to be bold and innovative, think in terms of continuous improvement, be visionary and innovative. So there's that, it's in your packet. The other thing I just wanted to call out, I'm not going to get into, but I thought you might be interested in something that we shared with the full board at the December 13th meeting up at Hillsborough at Glencoe High School, where it was hosted. And that is sort of a taking of stock into things that we have accomplished in calendar year 2024. So it's listed here. Much of this ties back to call outs on our one-page strategic plans in terms of what goals we set and where we are on them. Those that are in progress are continuing to go forth. There are some that are lumped together where the status is in progress, and some of the items in there have actually been completed. Again, I just thought some of you might like to know a little bit more about what the state board under which this committee sits does. So with that, I'll toss it back your way, Craig.
Okay. Thank you.
Unless there's any questions.
Yeah. Okay. Don't worry about putting up your hand either. Just jump in if you have questions or comments, unless it becomes unruly. Okay. I don't see any questions or comments. All right. We're going to move on. The next item is our public comment. Is anybody interested in public comment for this meeting?
Hey, Craig, it looked like John Whiteley raised his hand there for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm familiar with this format. I was looking at two more columns, and for two more columns, who was responsible for doing these and what are the due dates?
On the year-end review?
Yes, the year-end review.
Yeah, it's a wide variety of leads that are responsible for it. John, ultimately, the entire board is responsible to the deliverables that are called out on the strategic plan. It is a 2-year biennial strategic plan. So we just finished up 23-24. We're in the process now of creating 25-26. Similar to this, we've gotten a little bit of a late start because of the bottleneck in procurement, but it's well underway now. And we're driving to even a shorter strategic plan, because as you might imagine, in that long conversation we had that one good day on a sunny Friday this last summer, one of the things that is an ongoing struggle at the state, which Craig can attest to, and our meeting yesterday at the Kick and some of the conversations, is we have so much going on. And it's so complex. How do we actually have impact and affect change? And so we have shifted from, man, when I first started in this role, I think the strategic plan that we created back then it was 10 years, then it went to 5 years. It was almost like 35, 40 pages. So I've worked diligently, we as the board have worked diligently to get that smaller and smaller and more focused and condensed so that we actually have a chance of getting some things done. So you'll notice in there a call out for joint priorities that took the one page, well, it's front and back, but the front page of the strategic plan is mostly the typical vision, mission, sort of values. The other side of it is where the meat is in terms of call outs on deliverables and due dates. The due dates are not called out and are basically, it basically says that we'll have them done by the end of the calendar year. So it's basically a 2-year cycle, with the due date being December 31st of every year.
Thank you.
Now, does that mean, we could have a contract like this one, right? If the forestry report ends up being on the next iteration of the strategic plan, we know that the deadline, for example, that report is June 30 of this year. That won't be called out on the strategic plan unless folks decide to make a change. But heretofore, it hasn't been that way. But we would mark it as successfully accomplished at the end of the calendar year. Does that help?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on next to the public comment portion of our meeting. Anyone wishing to put something that's not on the agenda into the public comment? All right, seeing none, Leah, check in one more time. We don't have anybody that's logged in.
Nope, no public comment received.
Okay, and we do have a quorum, I think.
We do have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, so then next up is our consent agenda, which is approving the minutes from the October meeting. Any member of the committee can make a motion and a second.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Please identify yourselves both for Aaliyah for the record.
Sorry, this is Mindy Crandall with a motion to approve.
Thank you.
Dave Cooner seconds.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Opposed, nay. And abstentions. And I didn't see that comment fast enough. Okay, anyway, so let's move on then. Next item, thank you all. Next item is our Echo Northwest update. Melissa, you want to take this?
Yes, thank you, Craig. We are, I believe Andrew will try to share his screen right now as we kick off, and this is the moment of truth, right?
Yep. Are we
And
looking at
I'm
the
not
slide
yet.
Uh-oh. It says I am sharing my screen.
It looks like you're trying, but I just see a blank screen. Does anybody? That's the same for others, I think. Okay.
Yeah, just white.
Try one more time, and
Not very helpful.
if there are troubles, Todd and Aaliyah, I did send you the deck just as a backup here, but have Andrew try one more time.
Okay, claims says I am sharing my screen. So
Still blank for me.
Although it was a slightly different color this time.
well, that's nice. I can make it a rainbow. Well, I don't know what the issue is.
I downloaded the document. Would you like me to share it?
Sure. Yeah, let's go with that. I don't know what the deal is here, but
Yeah, it looks like it's
still haven't figured it out, obviously.
one of these days there will be none of these troubles, or maybe not. It keeps it interesting. But yeah, Andrew will get us started once Aaliyah is able to share those.
So, and while that's coming up, thank you for having us back here and looking forward to the discussion today. We are asking for a little bit of input from the committee. I'll talk you through those points in just a second here. Thank you. There it is. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Just so I'll go over the agenda again. Key part of what we want to do today is hear reflections on what we're talking about here. And I'll turn it to Melissa to talk through the agenda. Well, no, I'm sorry. I will talk through the agenda, and then I'll turn it over to Melissa to talk through the first item of input and a couple other things, and then I will take over. So really today, just wanted to walk through a quick update on where we are in the project plan. First item where we would appreciate some input, consistent with an email that we sent around earlier. We're interested in some help contacting employers, and Melissa will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then we'll move into some preliminary analysis. We've been collecting data, we've assembled a lot of the data, and have started to put the pieces together. I'll describe our approach to defining the forestry sector, as well as some, industry scale, few statistics on wages, probably nothing terribly surprising to anybody, but do want to just sort of lay the groundwork, talk about the framework that we're using, and again, get feedback on our approach. We'll dig in just a little bit to some specific occupations and occupational characteristics of the sector as we've defined it. And then we'll turn it over to my colleague Jade Aguilar, who will talk about where we are in the engagement process. We've already interviewed a number of representatives of the industry and are diving very quickly into some additional engagement focus groups, additional interviews, etc. Want to spend a second here just in this last bullet point here discussion. As we heard in the kickoff meeting and have heard in subsequent interviews, there are some people, maybe a lot of people, who feel that prior work in this area, the forestry sector generally, and the workforce challenges it's facing in particular, has missed things, that they've left some holes. And we do hope to fill those holes. We've heard your input. But if it appears that we're walking down the road and going to leave the same holes in a way that would undermine the value of a workforce study, please let us know. We're happy to have some discussion today. I think we have a few more minutes than we anticipated, but also happy to take any thoughts offline, whether it's a follow-up interview or a quick email, because we do want to align the study with everybody's best judgment as to what would add the most value from the perspective of the industry. So with that, I will turn it over to Melissa for just a couple of minutes here. And if we can flip to the next slide.
Thank you. So yes, just a couple slides here to remind us, just this one slide to remind us where we are in the process of the study overall. So we've moved through the first couple of tasks, and we're now moving forward on the tasks 3 through 5 simultaneously. You'll hear today on the forestry sector definition, report on initial engagement so far. We're not finished with that initial engagement, and then early workforce analysis that you'll see the beginnings of during this presentation. And then you can see the tasks to come in the next few months, program analysis, another round of engagement, although realistically the engagement will likely continue without a break, given where we are in the timeline, development of recommendations, and then final report and presentations in May and June. So next slide. We just want to say thank you so much to all of you who have responded to that request for contacts and introductions. It's okay that not everybody has responded. We understand everybody has different contacts and availability, and that's definitely fine. But we've gotten a good response, and have, many good inroads here, and just wanted to flash this list of firms up in front of you as, the firms and types of firms we're still, interested in. If anybody knows somebody at one of these firms or similar firms that you'd like to suggest that we reach out to, that would be great. We are probably going to be sending these emails tomorrow and early next week. So let us know quickly if there's somebody you want to recommend from one of these organizations or another similar organization. And I see Amanda's hand up.
Yeah, Melissa, I just wasn't sure. Do you want comments throughout the presentation or should we hold till the end?
You're welcome to make comments throughout. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, I will go ahead and make some comments based on the email that you guys sent out. And sorry, I haven't been able to get back. I've been presenting at conferences all week, and we have our big convention this Friday, Saturday. So it's been a bit of a busy week for us here at AOL, and I'm sick today. So that's why I'm going to stay off of camera. But one thing that we initially noted based on the list that was sent was we were surprised at the groupings or how you guys stratified. We expected to see significantly more strata to get to a representative sample across the entire sector. We were really hoping that we would see a breakdown between logging, trucking, technical assistance, landowner, mill, public entities. So, looking at Forest Service, BLM, ODF, things like that. So we're definitely expecting more strata and then getting that representative sample. So I think you guys have done a pretty good job at getting a representative sample from maybe the landowner and milling side, where you've got maybe 60 or maybe slightly more entities in that strata, and you guys maybe have identified 5 to 10% of those individuals. Well, there's over 1,000 logging entities. So if you want to get a representative sample of that strata, then you guys would need to be interviewing or surveying in some manner of fashion closer to 200 or 100 entities to be able to get that representative sample. So I guess what we're interested in is maybe having a more in-depth conversation around that sampling method and how you guys are going to fill some of those gaps, like was brought up, where especially around the small business trucking and logging and falling independent contractor side, we feel like reports in the past have really failed.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, I just say yes. Point taken. That's very helpful, and it sounds like there is a follow-up conversation we need to have. But I do want to say we certainly are not attempting to or scoped to interview 60, 70, 80, 100 or more individuals. And we did propose the possibility of a potential survey, I think, but had not gone down that road and would have to, I think, shift some things around if we did that. But again, in the interest of the feedback, if this is some of the important holes that, areas that prior work has missed, it certainly makes sense to try to rearrange things as we can. But I think we'll need to have that follow-up conversation to figure out what makes most sense there.
Yeah, I'll also note, Amanda, that the list we sent out, was not our complete list. We certainly aren't scoped, like Andrew said, to reach the number of people you're suggesting, but we certainly do have, the public employers, other entities. That was a cross section of the larger list that we're looking at, that we just thought, the committee would perhaps be especially well suited to connect us to folks. But certainly we can have some of these follow-up conversations. I saw a couple other hands. John, there was maybe one other.
Yeah, I just, I got your reply. I sent probably 800 different organizations, and I have contacts with several of them. If you need individual contacts from any, it would be needless for me to put everybody's information on there, but it's a pretty comprehensive list of manufacturers, at least, and a lot of those guys are tied in with landowners, mills, and the other stuff too. So I didn't know, if that was even something you could use. But if it's just a phone number you need, they're there. If not, I can get contacts if you have anything there you need. But I did it kind of sparingly in terms of giving out contact information.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I will just add, especially if we are trying to do outreach for an interview, oftentimes, especially with folks that are in the business, side of things, a direct outreach, if you're, know these folks, cold calls, cold emails are tough. So a kind of a linked email that says, hey, John, this is so-and-so, I'm on the steering committee, I'm working with this group, they'd love to connect with you, hope you can find time to meet with them. That goes a long way in terms of getting access to some folks. So if that's at all possible, that's the number one way that we could get on people's calendar.
Yeah, thank you, Jade. And we have had a little bit of that already this week, and we're going to push out an initial outreach, and it's possible if we aren't hearing back from people like we hope, we'll ask for more of those, personal outreach to people. Courtney.
Yeah, I appreciated Amanda's question and some of this. It has me wondering sort of how you are looking at, so you're doing these interviews, there's the number of unique companies, and then there's the employment representation that is, different. So one employer could represent hundreds of workforce, and, one employer could represent 10 of, and they're both valuable. And so I think that's an element of, as you're looking at these and they're pulling in volume and things, I think I'm curious as to how you're thinking about that. As Amanda says, strata.
Yeah, that's certainly one of our columns in our very long list of entities that we have. Employer size, number of employees is one of our criteria for sure, that we are hoping to get representation across. And I think even in this list on this screen, there's a range of very small to very large, and we're absolutely hoping to get some of every size. Okay, yeah, thank you for this feedback and these comments, and certainly taking notes on all of it, and continue to share thoughts, and any additional questions you have or suggestions. But for now, I think we'll move on to the next slide. And I'll pass it back to Andrew.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so I talked just a little bit here about defining the sector, and then start showing you some of the numbers. But just so you have some sense of where we started from and ended up, as you all know, as Melissa pointed out, one of our first tasks was a document review. We looked at prior research on the sector, industry reports, academic literature, other related research, maybe it wasn't specific to workforce, but just to get a sense of how the sector is typically defined and how it's defined in Oregon. We've had some meetings with Oregon Employment Department representatives. We discussed in detail their approach to defining the forestry sector. As you know, they issue annual reports on the sector, employment totals and detail. They use the same definition that OFRI uses their numbers, and uses therefore the same definition of the sector in their annual or their regular periodic reports. And we cannot exactly replicate OED's methods, which I'll say a little bit more about in a second, but we can come very close, and we'll be using, barring changes perhaps suggested by the committee here, relying first and foremost on OED's methodology in terms of identifying specific industries and subsectors as the basis for thinking about employment, occupations, and so on. I think thanks in part to some input from Amanda early on in the process, there are a lot of different industries that play a role in the forestry sector. Some of them are more tightly linked than others, and more overlap more with the forestry sector and some less. One of the examples of an industry that has less overlap is post-secondary education. And to get back to the OED's method, their approach was to, in partnership with OFRI and probably others, look at specific programs across the state known to serve the forestry sector, OSU's forestry program, some programs at community colleges, and count up FTE in those programs. And we have taken their lists and totals. We have not tried to replicate that, but have fed that into our totals. There are other industries where the department has identified, again, in collaboration with the industry, a set of specific employers that represent all or most of the activity in a specific industrial subsector that serves the forestry sector, and count up that employment separately, and we're able to do that as well. But in some cases, there are potentially aspects of the forestry sector that rely on firms that are not easy to identify or easy to characterize in the quantitative data. We would be able to describe those qualitatively in the sense of the services they provide the industry, but may not be able to bake that fully into our quantitative description of the industry. And I would say, from the perspective of a workforce study designed first and foremost to identify the major challenges facing the industry, that's okay, but certainly open to input along those lines. Happy to pause. I'll pause here for a second, but that's basically our approach. Next slide will show you the highest level sort of aggregate outputs of that approach. Okay. So first output here, just looking at employment in the sector over time, indexed to 2014. You see a number of lines. The dashed line is all industries in Oregon. That's total employment across all sectors. And in sort of reverse order, that increased by about 14% over the decade as a benchmark. Then they've broken up the forestry sector into businesses and private and public sector employers that have employees. That's the orange bar. That's most of the activity. There were almost 60,000 employees of businesses in the sector and government entities in the sector in 2023, increase of about 8.5% over the past decade. That's really a time of stability relative to prior periods. As you all know, employment was much higher in the distant past, declined over time due to changes, particularly in federal logging in Oregon, other changes in the industry. More recently, automation has decreased the need for employees. But this last decade has been a bit of a, not a U-turn, but a bit of a reversal of prior trends. Other component here, we have non-employer forestry businesses. These are sole proprietors, independent contractors. They may have their own equipment and go from job to job. We can count those in the data, although we know less about them than we do about the employers. Over time, that sector has declined a little bit in number. At present, there are about 3,100 so-called non-employer forestry businesses in the state. That's down about 300 from 10 years ago, declined about 7.7%. So shrinking a little bit, but also I would say relatively stable. And we can say a little bit more, and we will in our report, about the differences within the industry, within the sector, about increases and declines, whether it's primary forest products, secondary forest products, forest management, etc. Okay, next slide, please.
Looks like there's a question from Amanda.
Yep.
Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, just really quick on the non-employer forestry businesses.
Mm-hmm.
We know that many of our members are going to be captured in that data from the logging trucking side. Is the number of businesses, is that taken at like that, whatever that is, the 3,100? Is there any consideration for companies that might have partnerships where it's family owned and operated, so there's no employees, but there's actually, anywhere between 1 to 5 people engaged in that business?
Yes.
So basically, is that an underrepresentation of the actual, number of people?
Yes, and that's why for the most part, I like to keep them separate because it's not identical with one employee, one person per entity. We have a little bit of information actually about the type of structure, but not enough to be able to put firm numbers on that. So with the data that's available, the best we can do is count up the number of entities, and we do know their revenue. But and I think I'd say, you know, again, representativeness of the qualitative engagement. If when we're talking to these people, getting a sense of certainly how that size question comes into play. Yes.
Okay. Okay. No, that's helpful. Thanks for the clarity.
Okay. Yep. So breaking that big total up, most recent data 2023 here into our major sectors, just showing total employment in the sector, and as well as average payroll, average wages per employee for each of the sectors. And not surprisingly, primary forest products, your logging and so on. The biggest sector of the industry here. These aren't ordered in size, but more sort of in proximity to the trees out in the woods. About 20,000 in primary forest products, about 10,000 in forestry support. In secondary forest products, about 12,000, and then on down we have forestry management, other forestry dependent industries, transportation, and then a collection of what we're calling all other NAICS codes. And for those that aren't familiar, NAICS is just the wonky industrial classification coding system for industries at very fine level of detail. We don't always get information at the finest level of detail, but that's a collection of industries that are either very small and that maybe we can identify them in the data, or only partially associated with the forestry sector. And in such case, those are the kinds of things that the Department of Employment would try to identify a list of specific employers within a specific small but related industry and add up the employment there. And that's what you're seeing in that final column. Other feature of the chart, we're showing the average wages per employee at about 67,000. Obviously, the wages across subsectors of the forestry sector vary quite a bit. Some are a little bit below that statewide average. Some are quite a bit above. And that will play into subsequent analysis as we move through things. But
Andrew,
question? Yep.
You know, where, and maybe this is a moot point for, you know, the exercise that we're trying to develop here, but where this really shows separation is if you start segregating between rural and urban Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, that statewide average is truly that. But when you start taking rural Oregon statewide averages and stacking them up against the pay for these positions, I mean, those are the backbone of those rural communities. And that's, you know, honestly where my hackles get up is, you know, shutting a mill down in, you know, rural Oregon is much more impactful than just, you know, some industry shutting down in downtown Salem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do have a couple of slides that get at that point. Not fully in that you'll still see numbers that are comparing to a statewide average, but again, in the report and when we disaggregate in more detail than you'll see here, we hope to address exactly that point. I think it's very important, so definitely agree. Amanda?
So within this, I assume that this is in the forestry support, but like technical service providers, contractors that do consultation work, whether it's for surveying property lines and doing, wildlife surveys, things like that. Are they in that forestry support piece, as well as like entities like the Nature Conservancy and Sustainable Northwest and Lomacotsi? Are those, I'm just kind of wondering where those, as well as like research, might fall in.
Right. Well, I believe in the former case, yes, and we can confirm all this offline. The surveyors, et cetera, would be forestry support. I don't remember off the top of my head where places like the Nature Conservancy nonprofits fall, whether that's in the all other category or not. We can certainly confirm that for you, though. Okay. All right. Next slide. Okay. So first thing we did, again, thinking about
Andrew?
geography. Yep.
It looks like Julie has a question.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Didn't see the hand.
Oh, that's okay. I was just gonna confirm for Amanda. So there's a category that's captured under forest management, Amanda, that's forestry and environmental consultants, researchers, and academics. So a lot of those that you're asking about are captured underneath that category that's then lumped into a bigger forest management.
Okay, thanks. No, that's good to know. Yeah, I just at some point I'm assuming we'll have a chance to look at some of this information in more detail. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but definitely want to dig in and try to figure out where, at least from AOL's perspective, some of the gaps that we see in the data where they might, actually be at, and where this effort may need to focus a little bit more on, where it may not be a huge part of the employment in total, but if we're missing 10,000 people somewhere, like that's still really important. Because there's just so many pieces. All of us here know that this sector is so disaggregated, and there's so many things that are required to make this sector work, that including everything. I think that's a big part of what AOL is interested in getting out of this study, is really recognizing how many things are incorporated in this sector. And is it, kind of if this sector goes away, it's not just that primary piece, it's all these knock-on effects, right?
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. And I'd say we absolutely do have more detail than this, and we'll be reporting on more. But Amanda, or anybody, if there are specific questions where it would be helpful to see the detail up front to point us in a particular direction, just let us know, and we can, provide what we have, and are very open and interested in that kind of conversation. So first level disaggregation here by geography. A couple of things going on the left. You're looking at by workforce region aggregations of counties across the state. The forestry sector employment, does not include the non-employer establishments, although we do have that information by county. And the share each region is of that total. The number is a little bit lower than in the prior slide. We have 56,000. For some employers, we cannot identify a specific location within Oregon. Some of them, for the purposes of reporting to the system that allows us to count the employees, are located out of state. So we know there are employees in Oregon, we just don't know where they are. So that's why the number's a little bit different. The map shows the relative importance of the sector to the industry, and it's a little bit of a different picture. You see somewhat higher concentrations of the industry in southwestern Oregon. That region is not the largest share of the industry by count, but in terms of its importance to the to the economy overall, in terms of number of jobs, it's the highest region in the state. And there are some other interesting patterns across the state, and we will be digging into this. I don't want to dwell on the specific numbers too much, but we'll again pause to see if there are any questions or interest in variations of this kind of look. Okay. All right, and as we move to the next slide, obviously there are differences in the subsectors across the state, which we'll be peeling apart as well, which drives some of what we're about to look at. And this, you saw these numbers in a couple of slides ago, but just wanted to put the average pay per employee by subsector in front of you again, just to remind us all of the variation and acknowledge that these sectors are concentrated in different ways across the state. Some sectors, again, a little bit below that statewide average, some well above, and all those sectors are of different sizes as well. We can move to the next slide, which shows sort of the geographical wage distribution. This looks at the whole forestry sector by the same workforce regions, and just compares the average pay per employee to that statewide average. And we can think about this in the context of the relative importance of the industry to the economy overall. And I'll focus here just on that darker purple region, Eastern Oregon. By numbers, not a huge share of the forestry sector, although still important. We did see it was a relatively large share of the economy. Also the place where, compared to the statewide average, the wage falls the furthest below that statewide average. But again, typical wages and the cost of living in Eastern Oregon is very different from what it is in the Portland metro area, for example. So this is not to say forestry jobs are bad, but just to illustrate some of the differences we see across the state And as suggested, in our reporting and our analysis, we will be peeling this apart, looking at wages relative to regional wages, looking at differences across sectors, and thinking about the implications for workforce and competition for people, attracting people into the industry and keeping them there. Amanda, see a hand up?
Yeah, I'm just curious, are you guys going to explore within sort of the wage data, the wage of an entry-level position in this sector as it compares to other entry-level positions in other sectors, or anything kind of to that granularity?
We have trouble getting at entry-level wages specifically. We can look at sort of a wage distribution. We can see median or typical wages, and we can see the lowest wages for each of the regions, which isn't the same as entry level, but it gives a little bit of insight. So that kind of information, particularly to the extent that entry level wages are a challenge or an opportunity for the industry, would be something we would want to approach in the engagement. I see John White has a hand up. Is that a question, John, or maybe?
John's maybe muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
There.
Yes, with regard to there's two ways to get at if you don't get direct information from the employer. You can go, some of these are union represented places, so those contracts are fairly transparent. You can look at those, and those will have entry level across a lot of different disciplines. Additionally, the employment division in our area, we have I use our economist, and he can come up with data sliced and diced any way you like. So the economists at the local employment division are really good sources for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. And we have used union contracts before for similar studies. So both good suggestions. Okay, and I think just in the interest of time, I want to move to the next few slides relatively quickly. Happy to take input, but we'll not dwell too much here. Just a couple of slides here looking at breaking out the sector by occupation. Lot of bars here, so I apologize for the ups and downs, but just wanted to illustrate what you all know, the very different nature of the kinds of jobs that work in different parts of the forestry sector. Right now, we've just broken out forestry and logging, wood products and paper manufacturing, all other forestry industries that are represented in the other charts, broken out employment in those subsectors by major occupational group, and then comparing that to Oregon overall in the yellow bar. And I think the most important and obvious point here is that the forestry sector looks very different in terms of the occupational composition than the rest of the state, where most of employment for the state, in the rest of the state, is concentrated in things we didn't even break out, whereas most employment by occupation in the forestry sector for logging, forestry, not surprisingly, is in farming, fishing, and forestry at the top. Over 70% of the employment there. A lot of jobs in that sector in transportation, installation, maintenance, and repair. A little bit in protective services pops up as a relatively large share of the occupational groups. And the other sectors are similarly different, very different occupational mix than the state as a whole, which suggests the need for, sort of even global forestry workforce strategies that are going to be somewhat different than you might talk about for the state as a whole or for other important sectors within the state. And then I think, yep, Amanda.
Just a quick question here. How in the data, whether it's this chart or others, is seasonal and temporary employment considered, as well as immigrant workforce or migrant workers?
Yeah, excellent question. So all of this, well, a couple of answers there. In terms of seasonality, these are, this occupational breakdown is based on an annual average. And so there you will see fluctuation as activity waxes and wanes across the year. We do not have access to data that would allow us to say, it's here's what the distribution of occupation looks like in the summer, here's what it looks like in the winter, although we could speculate to some extent based on how overall subsector employment varies and what each subsector is focused on, but we can't say that you know your management's going to be more stable than people who are out cutting trees, for example, right? And that's something we can't see that differential in the data. So we can see seasonal employment overall, and we can talk about sort of the average for the industry across a year. In terms of migrant labor, we do not. We have to rely on external research. We don't have comprehensive data, so you know we'll be able to say things that researchers have said and that our interviewees say about these topics, but can't peer too deeply based on the data. Okay. One more similar kind of slide here, and I think in the interest of time, I will move through this quickly, but just looking at for occupations in these industries, the entry-level education as assigned by the Employment Department, by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the competitive level of education, which would be a more advanced position in the same occupation. And big point here is that similar to the occupational mix and related to the occupational mix, the sort of formal educational requirements based on the levels that the Department of Employment tracks look very different for the forestry sector overall and some of the subsectors as compared to the state overall, with many more occupations in the general economy requiring more advanced formal education. Okay, and then just one more slide here, and then I think we do need to spend some time talking about the engagement. This is something probably we'll ask for feedback on offline if people are able to provide, but we always like to come up with a list of occupations that sort of focus us for the purposes of a quantitative analysis and for the purposes of engagement as we're listening to people in the industry and asking questions of people in the industry. This list here consists of occupations that are very common, and we can give you definitions, but very common within one or more of the forestry subsectors, or for which the forestry sector or subsector accounts for a large share of employment. So there may not be very many of the specific occupation overall, but the forestry sector employs almost all of them, and suggesting that they're very important. That's not a perfect approach. I think it's a useful first approach. We always like to get feedback on this list to make sure we're not missing key pinch points, particularly as we're thinking about recommendations for improving workforce development. And so we will provide these slides and send them around and just ask that if you look at this list and are hearing or know a lot about specific occupations that are creating great challenges or might be great opportunities for further development within the state, we're all ears, and we do want to take those considerations into account as we finalize our quantitative analysis as we move out into these interviews. And with that, I will turn it over to Jade to talk about progress on the engagement.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm really excited to share with you a little bit of our initial engagement. We've had a lot of success getting folks to talk to us, which has been great. And I've had a lot of very interesting conversations with folks across the industry. So this is just the beginning of some of the things that they're sharing with me. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we're talking to. We're talking to folks across the business industry. So different, folks in different businesses across the industry, talking to folks at federal and state forestry agencies, and folks in training and education providers. We're asking them to characterize current trends, major shifts, and what are the impacts on workforce and training pathways that they're experiencing. As we move into our second phase, we are going to go back to those same people, and not necessarily the exact same folks we talked to, but also folks in those same categories, and talk about some of the recommendations and the implementation strategies that we're going to be thinking about, and start to talk about what they think about some of the recommendations that are emerging from the initial round of engagement that we are working through. So that's our plan. And go to the next slide. So far, we've talked to 13 folks, and some of those interviews actually we had multiple people on, so it's probably more than that, but 13 times we've met with groups of people. And then we have some more scheduled interviews in February with employers and a whole cluster of interviews with workforce boards in different parts of the state, all in areas that have deep ties to forestry in the kind of the areas that we saw as dark, having strong forestry relationships in coming up in February as well. So we have lots more coming, more to learn, but just kind of want to share some initial findings with you. So here we go. I've got 3 slides. So I wanted to start with some sort of stories that I keep hearing about. And so, because there's, these are things that I think are shaping, it's like we have this thing that we say at Echo a lot, which are feelings are facts. And so here are the feelings are facts that I'm hearing a lot about in the way that people talk about the forestry industry. So we have this old narrative that I think people talk about as they know when they talk about it, they know it's not true, but they talk about it as if it's still shaping the way that others are relating to it, or that young people are relating to it, or that the external public are relating to it. And this might still be the case. This idea that there's this still narrative that hasn't gone away yet, that there's this distinction, this discourse between the environmentalists and the loggers, and that is finally slowly changing, but that it had such a powerful hold on Oregon for so long that it's still shaping, the relationship to the land and to students. I heard this a lot about this way students engage with a career in the forestry industry. And so how do we get them to think differently, and how do we see this as merging together so that now a job in logging is also a job that is about ecological management, about environmentalism, about a sustainable resource that's actually better than concrete or steel, and that this are ways that you can be an environmentalist but also be a steward of the land and also be someone who logs. So these are things that I think have been dominant narratives that are slowly emerging as something that is changing but is slow to change, and continues to be a way that that informs this work. There's also this idea that these jobs in the forest are blue collar, that they're small town, and that keeps people from wanting to do it. So that is one of the narratives that we're hearing. Well, this is why people don't want to do these kind of jobs, because they're blue collar and they're small town. If we could just change that idea, then people would want to do it. And there's also this on this side, this idea that, like, for a lot of families who do this work and are proud of it, but they also have this feeling that we're proud of it, but we want our kids to go off and do something different. We want them to get a college education and not do it. Not that we're ashamed, not that we don't love our jobs, but that part of the narrative of being a good parent is to have a different life for your kids. So there's that. And then there's also a whole other narrative that I'm hearing, especially from a lot of the younger people that we're talking to, where they're saying, no, the reason I love this is because I grew up in this. My parents did this. My grandparents did this. I love this too. And like, I wouldn't have even known about it if I hadn't grown up in it. So there's a lot of younger people who love it because they grew up in it. There's also younger people who had no idea, who said, all I did was play video games my whole life. And now I'm just so desperate to reconnect with the land that I don't care. I want to live in this small town. I want to have like my hands in the dirt, and I want to return to roots. And I'm hearing this not just from, folks who grew up in urban areas and who are looking for an opportunity back in this, but also from tribal communities and tribal youth who are saying, listen, this is a part of my legacy, my ancestors, and it's my, ancestral rights to do this, and this is really important to me, and it's part of how I'm reconnecting to my people and my culture. So there's a lot of things happening here. So we're hearing stories on both sides of this. And then we're hearing from some folks, and these are coming out of the universities, who are saying, we're seeing young people who want to solve wicked world problems. And you've probably heard that term, but it's sort of like the big social problems that take a lot of, complexity to solve. So, wealth inequality or homelessness, these are not easily solved problems. And so that's that students gravitate towards those problems that are just really complex. And they don't see this, the forestry work as one of these big, wicked social world problems. And so they're saying, but it is, so like, how do we make it such that students want to gravitate towards forestry work? Because it is one of these big social problems. It's a climate change. It's wildfires. It's habitat, all of these things. Like, if we could make it more interesting for them and more complex, then they would want to do this. And it's just a branding issue. And if we could just make it fascinating from a branding, they would realize how interesting this is. But we're just not calling it that, right? We're calling it whatever, forestry, and that's just boring and old and outdated, and it sounds like we're going to just cut down trees. So that's what I'm hearing, and those are the kind of emerging themes from like a dominant narratives perspective. I'll pause for 1 second. I know that was a lot, and you've probably heard all these things. Oh my gosh, we got 2 minutes. Okay, we're moving on. Okay, just from a business side now, we heard from other folks that there is, from a private land perspective, there's a growth of timberland real estate investments, and that this is good and bad. On the good side, we have a consolidation of private land. And from a forest management perspective, that's a good thing, because we now have these huge swaths of forest that can be managed ecologically in better ways. On the negative side, it takes it out of the hands of family ownership, which takes it out of the sort of cultural history of Oregon and that, sense of place that a lot of Oregonians have by owning a small piece of the forest, and also the decision to manage it at that family level. So that's one of the kind of pros and cons we're hearing about that. The mill closures, we heard someone mention that earlier, that the consolidation of mills means that if you can do a lot of things and you're a big mill, that's great. Or if you're a really small specialty mill who does the one cool thing, that's great. But a lot of those mid-sized mills are closing. And then you all know this, but the technological changes in the industry are really changing the workplace. So you need fewer employees, but they need to be trained differently. They need to be more skilled in sort of high skilled technological kinds of ways. And so that changes the training that is needed. And then finally, next slide. That kind of forest work, the restoration, the burning, the fire mitigation and prevention stuff, all of that kind of like small contract work. There's a lot of folks that I heard that want to get into it, but are having trouble finding some kind of program to teach them how to do it. And so they go to some nonprofit group, and then they struggle to navigate the system of how to find a job through the Trex and the Gov, the online system of finding a job. Then I got really deep into the HB2 visa worker availability and how that might change, and how much we need. So there's the availability, the training of them, and the treatment of those, given that they're contracted through contractors that, once the forest can get those workers, then they don't have to really look into that deeply. And so there's some mistreatment there. And then a lot of preferences of the tribes to do that work themselves, and the reasons why the government chooses to go with local contractors instead. So there's just a lot here, and that's just a preview, and it's 4, but more to come. I also have a minute if anyone has questions and wants to stay on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, people are welcome to stay on if they can. I know we're at time, and I hope we've emphasized enough that we want to hear from you. So any thoughts this brought up for you, please reach out to us. We have, we're in the middle of all of this work that's listed, and we have our next meeting scheduled on March 6th, but certainly hope to be communicating with some of you between now and then about some of these details. So we'll be done there, but can stay on if people want to.
Amanda.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you guys for this presentation. Something we can just touch base on offline related to getting more engagement from the small, owner operators and some of the small contractors within different strata, whether that's the service contracting and firefighting and fuels mitigation, that type work, and restoration, or traditional logging, falling, etc. We recently did a big positioning kind of branding project at Associated Oregon Loggers. And so we wanted to get a cross section of our membership. And we worked with a firm that developed a methodology for interviewing, where we did reach out to many of our members, let them know that they would be contacted. And then they kind of randomly chose from a list of however many people we had, 60, and then, if they didn't get them, they went to the next one. It was all randomized. And so we've gone through that process with our membership. Be happy to share with you guys what that methodology looked like, as well as some additional pieces we've done around surveys with Department of Forestry and others to try to get really critical information from that specific part of the sector. So if that's something you guys are interested in, I definitely recognize the scope of the project and not being able to call and try to interview 50, let alone 200 loggers. It's very challenging. So definitely appreciate that if there's something that we can fit into the scope of work, potentially with a survey methodology. AOL would definitely be supportive of going that method, instead of kind of dropping it off and saying, well, it's too hard, it doesn't fit in the scope.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, like Andrew mentioned, we did have a survey as part of our proposal, but didn't get contracted for that part of the proposal. So certainly can follow up about possible shifts in other parts of the project potentially. Courtney?
I flagged something maybe for the parking lot back in previous slides. The discussion of cabinet makers and carpenters, and maybe if we can set some time to have that conversation. It actually does come up frequently when we're engaging with workforce board leadership, and I think that's not what we mean necessarily when we say forest sector, but it's meaningful to figure out how to engage on that, because it does create elements where people think they're helping the workforce sector. They're helping the sector because they're working on those jobs, which are very valuable but different. And so I'd love to get to a point at some point in here where we talk through that dynamic and what to do with that data.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Making a note of that.
Oops, sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah, I agree. Good point. The cabinet makers are on there because via the legislation, the forestry sector definition that we are to use includes the furniture manufacturing specifically. And so that's one reason they're there, and obviously interacts with other components of the forestry sector, and happy to have a conversation about how much to focus there, how to integrate that discussion, even if it's lesser focus, into the broader report.
Okay, great job, team. Echo team, I appreciate what you've presented here so far today. Lots of stuff for us to think about. Also to the members here, especially those of you representing the manufacturing side, we really need your help to encourage folks that have the right voice to help Echo Northwest with more information and data gathering on the manufacturing side. And again, we can't interview all the loggers and log truck drivers that we'd like to, I think, but we need your voices, especially on the manufacturing side, so that we can make certain that where the indicators are right now of industry wanting more skilled labor, we need your inputs in that regard. So let's make sure we use our networks to get those folks to engage. Anything for the good of the order? And we're meeting back here again in a month, is that right?
March 6th.
March 6th, that's right. Thank you. All right. Seeing nothing further, thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.
Adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks.
you.